Mr. Joseph Galloway. First of all, on behalf of my family, my wife Tasneem and my son Marzo, I'd like to welcome you everyone to this gathering. It is our great pleasure and proud privilege in welcoming so many guests from different parts of the country. And also I am very much privileged and honored to have the gracious presence of Mr. Joseph Galloway. Perhaps everybody knows who is Mr. Galloway. And he has a very decorated history as a military journalist, and he is the recipient of many awards. And most importantly, he visited Bangladesh in 1971, so-called East Pakistan that time. And he is the first-hand experience to see the atrocity, to see the genocide.
I'd like to invite Dr. Abdullah Jahmi to do a short introduction on Joseph Galloway.
Good evening, ladies and gents. I'm Abdullah Jahmi, as I say. Welcome you all.
I'm gonna skip the microphone, and I hope everybody can hear. This is not a big room. It's a pleasure to be here. I thank you all for coming. I'm honored that you've done so. I must tell you that my job back then would best be described as a fireman. When something went wrong, I got on a plane and went there. I used to keep scholarly journals published out of Cornell University's Southeast Asia department, and I would grab whatever journal for the country I was going to, and I would read it on the way there so that I got off knowing something about what I was stepping into. And I called in to East Pakistan in early 1971, and it was a cooked up deal by the Pakistan Army. 5 international correspondents were invited. No one had been allowed in because of what the army was doing to the Bengali people. And so there was a lot of pressure on the Pakistani government and army to let someone see what was going on. But it was certainly not their intention to let us see what was really going on. So we were very tightly controlled when we landed there. They took us straight away to the Intercontinental Hotel, and starting early the next morning, they put us all on an old Russian crop duster aircraft. 1 engine, canvas on the wings, not much power, a lot of DDT blowing around on the floor, and it didn't fly very high, which defeated the purpose of the Army. Was that they didn't want us being driven along the highways where we could see up close that every house had been burned for 100 meters either side of the highway. But we're flying along and we can see it even better than if we were driving on the ground. Every time they torched a house, the trees around it were killed by the fire. And so you had this strikingly green countryside with this destruction and death pathways through it along every road. And they would fly us somewhere and show us evidence of a massacre, they said, of West Pakistanis by Bengalis in the uprising. I don't know that that's what we were seeing. That's what they told us we were seeing. This went on for 3 or 4 days. We went to Chittagong, we went to Sylhet. We hit everywhere in the country that the little crop duster could fly to. And on the final day, they said everybody leaves in the morning. Well, I had not seen enough. I had not been allowed to talk to anyone other than Army people, government people. And so the next morning, I refused to leave. I said, I'm sick. They said, you must leave. And I said, you're going to have to carry me onto the airplane. I can't walk. No, this is not right. Well, that's the way it is. I'm not leaving. So as soon as the last plane for the day had gone, there was only one, I immediately got up, put on my clothes, and went out the front door of the Intercontinental Hotel, turned left and went straight toward downtown, followed by at least 10 secret policemen who were swarming all around me and trying to keep me from talking to anyone. And I marched right along until I came even with the gate to the U.S. Consul General, and I just dove right through it, although they were trying to stop me. And once I was in there, I was okay. And I immediately was taken to see the Consul General Archblood. Very fine man. In fact, the finest diplomat I met in a career of 50 years. And Mr. Blood said, I can't talk to you. I'm forbidden by Nixon and Kissinger to give any interview to anyone, to make any public statement, but they didn't tell me that I couldn't be nice to you, so I'm giving you an office next to mine. I have over 100 Bengali employees in this consulate, and they have family all over this country, and I'm telling them that you are here and you would like to talk to them and hear their stories. And so I sat there all day and I talked to dozens of these employees of the Consul General's office, and they told me the stories of horror, of massacres, of dead mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters and all of those things that you know happened. Now I knew happened.
Here is a copy of Mr. Blood's telegram. Nixon and Kissinger.
So the next day I got on that plane, and on that plane I started writing the story of what I had seen and what I had heard. And if I remember correctly, I started like this. There are only 3 things holding Pakistan together: fear, fire, and the sword. And that started the long story. And I can assure you the Pakistan Army and the Pakistan government were not very happy about that. I came back as tensions were rising, probably in October, late September, early October of 1971. Went first to Rawalpindi, Islamabad, took some briefings, and then flew to Dhaka and started covering the build-up to the war. It was a very tense time. Immediately before the war, 3 of us, Bob Sherrill of the New Yorker, doughty old British woman correspondent Claire Hollingworth, whose career dated back to Hitler's invasion of Poland in 1939, and she hadn't missed a war since then. She's still alive, lives in Hong Kong. She's 104 years old. Quite a remarkable gal, and I'll tell you more about her in a minute. We flew back to Karachi, and then from Karachi to Rawalpindi, and saw the American ambassador, who was a complete moron, a political appointee of Nixon's. and a Pennsylvania businessman of some sort, and he was so out of his depth, you couldn't believe it. And we also saw, you know, if the ambassador was a moron, General Yahya Khan was 3 times a moron and drunk on top of it. We saw him, and the ambassador told us that he was the only thing keeping Pakistan from attacking India. And I thought, my God, we're in trouble. So we toured around a little bit, took a few briefings at the British Embassy and the American Embassy, and talked to the spooks and the spies and the political guy, and then we flew back to Dhaka. And the war broke out. We awoke one morning and the Indian Air Force was bombing hell out of Dhaka Airport. Someone had the brilliant idea to prove that the Indians were attacking. It's not like we didn't know that, but they got a bus and drove all the correspondents out to the airport. And just as they pulled into the gate, here came the alarms went off, the air raid sirens, and here came the Indian Air Force, and we all jumped out of the bus. The Newsweek correspondent, Tony Clifton, and I leaped into a not very deep ditch, and more like a dent in the earth, like that, and here came 4 or 5 Indian jet fighters strafing right across us. Their target was a UN Pilatus Porter Stoll aircraft sitting on the apron there. I must say that my AP competitor, an Australian correspondent, ran and hid under the wing of the Pilatus Porter, which was the target of this attack. He didn't stay there very long. I heard the Newsweek correspondent cursing and saying, "I'll punish the bastards." And when there was a lull in the fighting, I said, "Who are you planning to punish, that Indian pilot?" He said, "No," he said, "my bosses at Newsweek, wait till they get my expense account on this one." So life goes on. We would watch from the rooftop of the Intercontinental Hotel, we would watch the air battle, which didn't last too long. The Pakistan Air Force was putting up F-86 Korean War jets against Sukhoi 7s and MiG-21s, and they were quickly swept out of the air. The Pakistani army put up, honest to God, barrage balloons from World War II. They were hung on a steel cable with a big weather balloon on top to try to keep the Indian Air Force from bombing the airport. We would stand on top of the roof of the Intercontinental Hotel, and the room service would bring coffee and tea. It was very civilized until the Indian Air Force strafed the top of the hotel, and then we got down from there very quickly. We were taken on an occasional tour to the front, but as the war wore on, and it seemed to be going not very well for the Pakistan Army, General Niazi Khan came to the hotel to give a press conference. By then, the hotel, we had turned into an International Red Cross neutral zone. We ran across 2 Swiss guys who worked for the Red Cross, and they had two important things: a rubber stamp with the Red Cross seal and a copy of the Geneva Conventions. Very handy to have. And we read up on it and we decided to declare the hotel a neutral zone, and we took it over from the manager, and he was happy to give it to us, and we ran it for the duration of the war. Along about midway of the fight, one of the correspondents went over and sat down with the Quisling government, the governor to be precise, and basically negotiated his surrender to the international media, the whole government. The rules were that they couldn't bring any weapons in, and that they would basically be under our control. We put them on the top floor in case the Indian Air Force came back. More about that later. And then comes Niazi Khan to give a press conference, and he arrived and he came to the gate, and we took turns guarding the gate. And as I recall, it was an English correspondent who was doing duty that day, and he informed the general that he was welcome to come in and give a press conference, but it was a neutral zone and he couldn't wear his pistol. And the general was furious. He said, I could have all of you killed. And the Englishman told him, and in that case, who would you give your press conference to? So he gave his pistol to his aide who sat in the Jeep with it and came in and gave a press conference. And he said, I am going to defend Dhaka to the last man, to the last Jawan. I will die myself. The Indian tanks will have to run over my chest. Mrs. Hollingworth afterwards says, I think he's lying, Joseph, but we need to find out for sure. Fetch a car. And so I liberated a UN vehicle painted blue and white with the flags on the fenders, and off we set at her direction to go check out the bridge. She had explained to me on the map that basically if General Khan intended to defend Dhaka to the last man, it was along the rail line and the river and one other natural boundary. She said, let's go check the river. And we drove, I think it was about 10 miles out to where the river crossed, the bridge crossed the river. And in going out, we were strafed by the Indian Air Force, but their aim was bad. And we drove out there and parked the car where Mrs. Hollingworth ordered. And we walked out on the bridge, and she said, she was blind in one eye and couldn't see out of her other one. She said, do you see any soldiers anywhere? And I looked up the river, I looked down the river, and I said, no ma'am, no soldiers at all here. And she said, as I figured, he was lying. He does not intend to defend Dhaka, or he would have soldiers here. And we drove back to the city, and in fact, another day or so later, the Indian Army came in and took Dhaka without a fight. At that point, it got interesting. A large mob, I should say 10,000 people or more, came to the hotel and said, give us those bastards who you got up on the top floor. And we said, no, you can't have them. We had already talked to the Indian Army. The Indian brigadier commanding the tanks had come by the hotel, and he said, we'll be around to pick that lot up shortly, but meantime, they're still yours. and here's how you can reach me if you have any problems. Well, here these guys came and they said, give us those bastards or we'll kill you. And we said, well, you may have to if you want them that badly. Meantime, we were getting in touch with the brigadier, who came with 3 tanks, very quickly, I might add. And he was cheered as he came through the mob. They were throwing flowers and yelling Zindabad, that good stuff. And he backed his tanks, the 3 of them, into the driveway of the Intercontinental. And he got out and he finally waved, and the crowd settled down and quieted down. And he pointed at them and he said, piss off or I'll shoot you. And they were all asking each other, what did he say? And so he repeated it. Piss off or I'll shoot you, and you have to the count of 5 before I open fire. And I must say, in 30 seconds, that road was empty of everything except flip-flops. Armies are the same the world over. They don't take a lot of crap from a mob of civilians. I also have to say, and this is not funny at all, on that next day after the war ended, the word came to the hotel that there had been a massacre. And we went out to the brickyard. And I stepped up to the edge of the pit where they dig that red mud and turn it into bricks, and looked down, and there were quite a number of bodies laying there. But the first one I saw was my stringer, who worked for UPI and Reuters and probably AP too, and a local newspaper, and a very fine correspondent he was, and he was laying there dead. And we started getting identifications on the others, and next to him lay Bengal's finest heart surgeon, and they had cut his heart out. And on and on and on. And what we were seeing was a last thumb in the eye from the West Pakistanis to try to cripple what nation would emerge as Bangladesh came into being. The intelligentsia, the doctors, the people who would make a government work right, they had all been slaughtered. They had been picked up at their homes and dragged out there and murdered. Not the least of all of the killing that went on, you know as well as I do, somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 million Bengalis died in this war, in this massacre, in this genocide, if you will. I am not proud of what my government's position was at that time. Mr. Nixon and Mr. Kissinger had decided that it was in they needed to swing toward Pakistan. They needed to silence a man like Arch Blood, who was trying to tell the truth about what was going on. They thought that they needed to tilt to Pakistan, and at one point were even discussing moving the 7th Fleet into the Indian Ocean and trying to, let's say, threaten India. I wouldn't think that was a good idea, but that they were talking about it. I would rather have your questions than, I don't like the sound of my own bugle that much. So if you have questions, I'll do my best to answer. I'm very proud that I was present at the birth of a nation. I have always wished Bangladesh well. I know that it's a country with many problems, many issues, not loving Mother Nature. I can recall flying over during the monsoon in a helicopter and seeing hundreds and hundreds of people packed onto the only high ground, you know, a little patch of earth that wasn't water, and there's not even room for people to lay down. They were all standing because there was no room. And if the water rose much higher, somebody was going to die. It's a tough country. It's a hard living. I hope that things are better now than they were then. They would have to be. But anyway, let's do Q&A. I enjoyed that much.
Mr. Galloway,